Great, thank you. I'm Patryk Perkowski. I'm an assistant professor of strategy and entrepreneurship at Yeshiva University in the city of New York. And I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to share this work, which is joined with Alesh Marshall, who is an economist at the Central Bank of Slovakia. All right, so I think we're all gathered here over this 2-day period because we are interested in what impact will generative AI have on the labor market. And as the title of this work here suggests, Alesh and I are sort of tackling this question from the perspective of routine bias technical change. Right, so this is the sort of canonical model thinking about, how do new advancements in technology impact the labor market. And so we can think of workers as having jobs that consist of tasks. These tasks vary in the extent to which they are either routine or non-routine. So you could think of routine tasks as those where you could follow explicit rules. You could sit down, write out a set of steps, right, that one would need in order to complete a given task. Right? Non-routine tasks, on the other hand, these are tasks that require judgment and discretion, right, situational adaptability, sort of working with other humans, etc. And so the main sort of premise here for RBTC is that we've seen that technological advancements, on the one hand, tend to substitute for workers in routine roles, right? And then they tend to complement workers who sort of do non-routine job tasks, right? And there's sort of been various evidence looking at, information and communication technologies, right? Sort of tracing out those technologies with the sort of impacts we see here. And so the question we're sort of after here is, will generative AI sort of follow these predictions from this framework? And on the one hand, sort of want to caution that, of course, it seems like too early to tell right now. We think of the, diffusion of various computers and the internet in the 80s and 90s. We have compared to the first predictions or the first empirical evidence of RBTC in the 2000s, right? Which seems to suggest, all right, it's sort of too early to tell right now. And if we take the launch of ChatGPT in November of 2022, right, that means we're looking at something about 2033, maybe 43, probably lighter, sort of lower, given we've sort of, I think gotten better with data collection. What we argue, though, in this paper is that there are certain micro foundations of RBTC that we can test today and that we can test using a field experiment. And so the micro foundation that we're really interested in here is this idea of generative AI complementing non-routine labor, right? And so what we do in this paper is we can sort of imagine, we try to test for this complementarity between the technology on the one hand and the sort of share of work that is non-routine, right? And so what we do is we use these tests from complementarities and performance equations that ask us to compare, right, if we randomly assign workers to access AI, right, and then to complete non-routine tasks, will the output that they get, from that task, will that be higher than what they would get without AI on these non-routine tasks, with AI on the routine tasks, and then you subtract out, this term over here, right, to sort of compare, is the benefit of doing both of these at once greater than the benefit that you get from doing each of these individually? And so that is what we do in this paper. So we run a field experiment with the Central Bank of Slovakia. And this field experiment, we're aimed at answering 3 interrelated questions. So the first question is, what are the productivity impacts of generative AI in central banking? Right, so we have evidence from sort of other settings, including, legal industry, consulting. Right, so here we're looking at this from the perspective of central banks. We will think about the impact both on quality and efficiency, right? And then we're going to look at the impact both across these sort of generalist routine versus non-routine tasks, and then also these more specialized tasks that require high levels of domain expertise. The second thing we're going to look at is, do we find evidence of this complementarity between generative AI and non-routine tasks? And so to get at that question, we have both within subject variation, right? So given a set of tasks, we're randomizing within the subject when they get access to the technology or not, and then also between subjects variation, right? And so I'll show you how we use both of those sources of variation, right, to estimate this complementarity. And then we do so both on average across the entire sample, and then for specific participants themselves, right? So we could say, okay, for this given worker, right? Here is that additional boost that you get, from generative AI for non-routine tasks versus your output for those other three buckets. And then lastly, we look at distributional consequences, right? So we have this within participant variation. We get connected to demographic data. We have sort of rich data on how much they were using ChatGPT before, what is the content, what is the nature of their work, right? And so we'll sort of think about, what are those distributional consequences. The setting here is going to be the National Bank of Slovakia. So this is the central bank of Slovakia. Their goal is to oversee monetary policy and financial stability, right? So you could think of the U.S. equivalent here as the Federal Reserve Bank. And so Alish and I worked, with approval from their Board of Governors to run a two-stage study. In stage one, we had participants complete this very, very detailed survey on how is generative AI being used in one's work, right? So we have info on, the types of tasks they do, how often are they using generative AI, which generative AI tools are they using, are they switching tools, etc. Right, so that happened here, stage one, in April of 2024. In stage two, the main results I'm presenting today, this was in June of last year, right? We had this 2-hour workplace experiment, right, where we asked sort of these employees to come in and complete a series of tasks. Right. So total, we have about just over 100 employees, about 10% of the bank's total employment. Pretty much all of them a year ago had heard of generative AI, but I think what is interesting is only half of them had used it at work before, right? If we look at what were some of the most common tasks they use generative AI for, it was coding, emails, and learning new skills. And then if we look at what predicts non-usage, right? So we have the sample of workers, some of them use it at work, others do not. What separates those that uses versus do not? The biggest predictor here was actually the routine task mix, right? So in that survey, 2 months before, this experiment, the more of your work that we would classify as routine, codifiable, you can follow step-by-step instructions, right? You were much less likely to use generative AI. We've also then seen some interesting things about reputational concerns, right? So workers who believe that using generative AI will lead to sort of negative reputational consequences from coworkers or from managers, they were less likely to use, right? And then some fears of automation here. So we take the set of participants and then we have them complete, a series of tasks. The first set of tasks that they do are these generalist tasks. So these are going to sort of these come from the task classification system from David Otter's work, right? So we have, there's sort of various routine tasks that they have to do, including data entry, proofreading, things of that nature. And then there's also sort of non-routine tasks, right? So this is prioritizing a to-do list, writing creatively, trying to convince someone else of your point. And so for each of these different task categories, we have 2 examples of each, right? And so that combines then to a series of 14 tasks that they're doing over the course of an hour. So about 4 to 5 minutes here per task. Next up then, we have these specialist tasks. So we took our participants here, they work in different divisions. And then so we define very sort of domain-specific tasks for various participants to do. Right, so for the macroeconomists who work at the Bank of Slovakia, right, they had to create a fictional monetary policy report. Right, there was something for banking supervision, something for the legal team as well. Right, so we really tried to match these specialist tasks with the work that was being done here. In terms of incentives here, we sort of offered them a flat rate for just sort of completing the study. On average, that was about 5% of their monthly salary. Right, and then there was a performance bonus for those who were the top performers. And then we're going to measure here productivity, both using a quality measure. Right, so we have 3 evaluators who are blind to the various treatment conditions. Right, so we ask them to evaluate these various, submissions. Plus, we have this efficiency measure, which asks sort of how long did it take you to complete the given task. In terms of the generative AI tool that we use here, we use OpenAI's GPT-4o, right? So this is a multimodal language model released 1 month before the launch of our experiment, right? And it can sort of, you can use it with text, audio, and image. And so 3 main reasons why we use this, right? So the first reason is that OpenAI's models really are, at least sort of when we ran it there, the most widely adopted tools for workers, both on average and then within our setting specifically. So when we ran that survey, we found that pretty much everyone was using, OpenAI tools. They were not switching tools based off the task, et cetera. And so we thought, this would be a good reason to use GPT-4o. Second here, and this is related to sort of the multimodal capabilities, it's useful in a variety of different applications, right? So if we have these tasks that span the various categories, that would be, quite useful here. And then lastly here, we believe that using GPT-4o helps us estimate, a lower bound of the complementarity between generative AI and non-routine work, right? So since we've done this experiment, there have been newer models that have launched, right? Those have more enhanced reasoning skills and abilities. And to the extent that those enhanced reasoning abilities are more, effective for non-routine tasks, that means the sort of extra bump that we measure from the technology of non-routine tasks should be a lower bound. And so, participants, we're going to sort of randomly assign, GPT-4o. We work with the IT department, right, to make sure that, if you're in the treated condition for a given task, you have access to it. If you're not, access is blocked off. And then lastly, we see strong rates of uptake, right? So for those who have access to GPT-4o for a given task, 94% of the time, they're using it here. All right, so this is an image here of what the design looks like. That's going to allow us to get this variation, right? So here, each participant, the columns here are participants, right? And then the rows here are going to be the various tasks that one does. If the box here is blue, that means you have access to generative AI. If it is, white or gray, you're in the control condition, right? So participant number one comes in. Right, they're going to do a set of 7 of these generalist tasks where they have access to generative AI, right? Then we're going to flip their condition and say, all right, now what you're going to do is do similar set of tasks here, right, where you are now not having access to the technology. And then we do something similar for the specialist tasks down here. For participant 2, we're going to flip the order. So 2 is going to do 1 through 7 without AI, and then 8 through 14 with AI, right? And then we're going to continue this sort of alternating pattern here. And what that means is we can say, all right, for participant number 1, we can estimate the difference between average performance here versus here, and get a treatment effect for participant number 1, controlling for the sort of set of tasks, the difficulty of those tasks. We can also then look for differences across participants, right? So we can say, all right, just for 1 through 7, what is the average difference in performance for those in the treatment condition, the odd columns, versus those in the even columns. All right, so in terms of our results here, the first thing that we find is that access to this tool leads to large increases in both of our productivity measures. So the x-axis here is quality, the y-axis there is efficiency, or how many minutes it took. And these are just sort of density plots that compare the AI condition in blue versus the control condition here in orange. Right, so we see in terms of quality here, an average quality score on the 7 questions of about 41 that rises to about 62, right? And we see that, sort of less inequality, right, in that performance distribution. Versus on the right-hand side here for efficiency, we see on average it took half an hour to do a given set of tasks. Right, that's going to drop down to about 24 minutes, but a lot more variability in those estimates. Right, so there's some that are able to really effectively use the technology, others who are not. The next thing that we can do, given this design here, is we can look at participant differences, or sort of estimate these at the participant level. Right, so we take that same regression. What we do now is run it for each participant, and then graph out, what are the distribution of treatment effects that we see. So for quality here on the left-hand side, we see, it follows this normal distribution that I overlaid on it, right? And about 95% of participants here are seeing this increase in quality. On the right-hand side here for efficiency, we see less of a, normal distribution here. There's most individuals here have a small increase in efficiency, right? But there's some that are, much more effectively able to integrate it, and about 80% of those are to the left here of x equals 0, All right. So for the sort of the main result here, this is looking at, what is the complementarity between AI and non-routine tasks. So what we do in this figure is we're going to estimate that equation that I showed you on slide number 2. We estimate that for each participant in our sample. And so you can think of this as what is the additional boost that you get when you are using generative AI on a non-routine task relative to generative AI on a routine task, non-routine task with no AI. And these here are in standard deviations, and I have sorted them from sort of least to greatest here. Right? And so anything to the right here of x equals 0 means, okay, there is that strong complementarity there, right? To the left there, that means there's negative complementarity, so these workers are doing, better on routine tasks with AI than the non-routine ones. Right, and so the median here is about 0.5 standard deviations. Right, for some it's a lot higher, but about 80% of the distribution here is to the right of x equals 0. Right, so sort of finding evidence for that complementarity. The last thing I'll sort of say here briefly is if we compare at the task level here, right? So this is at the task level. The workers who benefit most, the tasks where generative AI is most helpful are non-routine tasks. But if you look at these results from the worker level, workers who do have a larger share of routine work actually benefit more, right? So then there is this mismatch between at the task level, it's most helpful for non-routine tasks, but if you give all the workers the same types of tasks, the routine ones see the biggest lift in performance, right? And so it seems to suggest there is some role for employer-employee matching. Right, and we do some sort of simulations here, trying to get a sense of, if the firm can change how they assign workers to given job tasks, right, they can get about a 7.3% boost, right? So in this figure here, we see the impact of AI, right? It's increasing output. It does more so for the non-routine work output here than the routine ones, and NBS is right here, right? So they can rearrange workers to try to move to that frontier. All right, so in this manuscript, right, we're sort of thinking about what are the productivity impacts. In terms of what I think are, important open questions, right, RBTC, this is sort of just one part of this big theory. And for routine bias technical change to occur at scale, there have to be various adjustments, by markets, firms, and workers alike, right? So changes to the, product and service mix, right, changes to hiring practices, et cetera, right? And so I'd be interested to see how do those play out. The last thing I'll sort of mention here is that, we find some interesting results with skills, right? So I think prior work has found that lower skilled individuals, get the highest boost from generative AI. Here we find that is the case for generalist tasks for quality, but not for efficiency or these domain-specific tasks, right? So it's sort of a less rosy picture here on sort of skill bias and generative AI. Thank you so much.
So for the sake of clarity, when you were doing your study on the workers at Slovakia, was the study on all workers regardless of department or only bankers?
Yeah, all workers.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the workers, you mentioned that there was they felt like this, stigma or an association between reputation and the use of AI. I mean, the use of, the open AI, right?
Yeah.
Now, was this reputation, this idea of reputation, was it applicable to routine and non-routine work as well?
Yeah, so we unfortunately didn't ask. We didn't vary when we asked the question about these reputational concerns.
Right.
We didn't have a specific, task category. We pretty much said, would you be comfortable with a coworker or a manager knowing that you use a generative AI tool for your work? And so we didn't really get at, that. We could look into do we have data on their share of routine work? At baseline, so we sort of compare, do those who do more routine work, are they more likely having those reputational concerns or more likely maybe the automation concerns? But yeah, unfortunately we did not.
Is there a core assumption? I'm sorry, and I'll let him go in a second. Is there a core assumption that reputation is related to their work output or their income or their overall standing in the company, right? Or I'm assuming.
Probably. We haven't done that much with the reputational result. It was just sort of like this correlation that we found, but I'd be happy
Okay.
to talk with you after,
Oh.
get some ideas of how to push that forward.
Okay.
This is super cool. My question is the people who got worse. Like,
Yeah.
Who were those people?
Yeah.
Sorry if I missed
Yeah,
that.
no. Yeah. So for so very few people got worse. Let me go here. So in terms of quality itself,
Yeah.
if you look at quality across the bundle of all 14, I think this is just the generalist tasks. We also have the specialist ones. For the generalist tasks, right, 95% of the people got better. I'm not sure who, given we have n equals 1-on-1, maybe one or I guess maybe 5 there that.
I just think it might be interesting to ask those people.
Yeah.
Like, what's happening?
Yeah.
Is it just a
So
learning curve? Or
I think that's true here for the efficiency outcomes, right? So when we look at the efficiency outcomes, right, the folks who are to the right of x equals 0 is their first time sort of using this, right? And so of course they're gonna, struggle on the efficiency angle there. But I will say we have not done that much thinking about, who are the people who sort of get worse. And I have not sort of presented the specialist results here for the specialized domain specific tasks. There sort of seems to be sort of lower skilled individuals, right? So you have to have some level of domain expertise, right? Plus knowledge of sort of using generative AI before. But yeah, that's a great question.
So just a clarifying question. I follow the story. I got a little tripped up on the RBTC framing, maybe, I guess. So if you think about that literature, it sort of describes routine tasks as rules-based. And there's certainly some people who would argue that the whole neural network explosions because it can do things that are non-routine in that sense. So I just wonder if there's a way to reframe or redefine what you're calling routine tasks in a way that's a little bit more clear, right? Because I'm getting a little tripped up between this notion that it's routine and then this, you know what I mean, this complementarity. Like, this is sort of going, the whole point is it can do things beyond what Otter and company might have conceptualized in the late 90s.
Yeah, that is one thing when we were, designing the study, it was like the routine versus non-routine distinction doesn't feel quite right.
Yeah.
And I agree with you on that. We've tried to think about, what else would it be, right? We have not unfortunately gotten there. We'd love to sort of talk about it after. But I think that is the next step here.
Did I understand correctly that on average they use only 1.5 prompts?
Yes, yeah.
It's like very
a big left tail. So I think, let me finish your question.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see the distribution.
The distribution,
I
yes.
There's a lot who didn't use it.
Yeah, so a big left tail there. I can share from like the pre-survey, right? It's sort of, I think, similar patterns there where in this organization there are some super users, right, who are figuring out how do you integrate this into sort of everything you're doing. Others are still sort of trying to figure it out. And so my sense is those who are sort of newer, a lot of them were sort of new to this, right? They were like one prompt. Maybe you don't even use the output that you get, right? If you see, maybe it's not correct.
And it would also be interesting to know how they used it if you dig into the prompts. I don't know if you have
Yeah. So we have the transcript data. We have not done that much analysis on it. I think that would be, one thing we can play around with as we revise.
Just two quick ones. I'm wondering, is there order effects? Like, for example, is the experience of using chat, GPT makes it a lot easier, and then when I got to do it myself, it's like, so is there an order effect?
Yes, I think on average, I forget exactly. I will say, so in our estimations, we control for, when we have our regressions, we have individual fixed effects, we control for whether you were getting it in this first batch or the second batch.
I wasn't interested in that, but I was wondering, is there a control? Is there an order effect?
So I'm not sure. I guess it would be tough to, an order effect here we can't get from, these categories here. But I can look at what is the average performance across these. And that would be, I'll look into that.
Just the other one, were these tasks things that people kind of knew how to do, or is it just the case that ChatGPT knew how to do it and people didn't? So they knew how to do it. So we tried to design these sort of relative to the work that they would do at the central bank. Right. So part of this is drafting an email. Right. Part of this is task prioritization. There were some sort of analytical questions. But I think it would be interesting. So one thing that we have not done for this paper is like assuming you just have one prompt, right? How good is 4.0 on these various prompts, right? And so that's something we can definitely explore.
Yeah.
During the before you actually ran the experiment, you did a survey of the workers. I assume managers and workers as well, right? Did the perception of the workers and their productivity, did the managers assume they were using OpenAI?
So we do have a question. What percentage of the bank do you think uses it?
Okay.
We have not looked at that for workers versus managers.
Okay.
But for your reputational considerations question, right? We have would you worry about your reputation if you were using it?
Right.
And then also, would you yourself judge someone negatively if they were using it? And so on that end, we don't see, individuals are not sort of, both workers and managers are not negatively judging others, but there is some sort of belief that at least some subset of these workers have that, there are these negative reputational concerns.
But by any chance, do you see a change in productivity if you organize the workers by managers? Well, I'm assuming here that there's in the bank, you have like a manager and they have a team of people. You have another manager and there's a team of people, right? I'm assuming that. So based on that assumption, if you organize their productivity results by teams instead of like a huge swath, is there a difference in like productivity output based on the expectations of your manager?
Yeah, so we have not done that, unfortunately. It's something that we could look into. One thing that we want to do is look at maybe across different divisions and teams to get at that. I think the one tricky thing is, we were designed to detect these effects here. And so for questions like that, we're probably going to be underpowered to, say anything that is too strong enough.
Another thing to consider when it comes to the routine and non-routine tasks, I'm making an assumption here, so I recognize that. But when it comes to those specific tasks, I'm sure that there's a different level of weight depending on what department you're in, right?
Yes.
Like there's different things that are considered routine based on what part of the bank you're in. And those tasks, I assume, have a different level of reputation and risk. So that may also change their interpretation or their relationship with how they use OpenAI.
Interesting.
Just a thought.
To think about. Yeah, I will definitely think about that. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate your time.